Today's webinar is being recorded and it will be made available so that we can go back and look at today's presentation. We would like to ask that as questions come up during today's presentation, if you want to put those down in the Q&A box down at the bottom of your screen rather than the chat. We won't be taking questions during the presentation itself, but do have time dedicated at the end that we'll be able to address those. So just keep that in mind as questions come up. So once again, welcome. I'm going to pass over to Don to take it from there for introductions.
Thank you, Perry. Again, I'll say welcome from Intecrowd as well as our friends at Thomson Reuters. Today we will be presenting a webinar showing the integrations to Thomson Reuters ONESOURCE that connect the third-party tax engine seamlessly with Workday. Looking at a brief agenda for today, we're going to go through quick introductions, overview of the partnership and product. We'll be presenting a demo of the ONESOURCE third-party tax integrations in the Workday tenant. We will be then handing it over to our friends at Thomson Reuters, who will be presenting some of the Thomson Reuters ONESOURCE features and benefits, as well as presenting a demo of indirect tax determination in the ONESOURCE tax engine. Finally, we left some time at the end for a question and answer with the panelists today. And the panelists that we have today will be myself, Don Feimer. I am the program manager for the suite of integrations to Thomson Reuters ONESOURCE. As well with me at Intecrowd will be Caitlin Allen and Daniel Fieldhouse. And then our friends at Thomson Reuters will be Jennifer Pelez, Orazio de Alba, and Troy Fishnaller. For a quick overview of the partnership and product, first discuss that Intecrowd was introduced to Thomson Reuters through Workday as a leader in integration technologies to develop a repeatable, scalable, and cost-effective connector to the Thomson Reuters ONESOURCE indirect tax engine. Our suite of integrations that we've created has been certified by Thomson Reuters tax technology professionals through an integration verification process. And what this is a quality control effort that Intecrowd worked with Thomson Reuters development team to test various transaction tax scenarios that pertain to various jurisdictions, including US, Canada, and VAT related countries. Intecrowd and Thomson Reuters are also continuing to work together to expand the functionality of our integrations to Thomson Reuters ONESOURCE. On this slide, you can see that the integration current functionality as well as what's in development. So currently, as part of the integration, we support in Workday customer invoices, transaction tax on customer invoices, transaction tax on supplier invoices, including self-assessed tax, tax validation, and tax validation with accrual. We also are supporting VAT international capabilities with VAT and GST tax for Canada. And then we do support a customer and supplier address validation that is integrated into Thomson Reuters ONESOURCE as well. In development, we are currently in development with creating a connection to purchase orders in Workday, calling the ONESOURCE indirect tax determination. Here you can see a brief framework for the integration. We'll go into more detail shortly in the integration demo, but you can see customer invoices are entered in Workday. The tax integration is called off the business process. The tax tables will be called in ONESOURCE. The transactional data will be stored in ONESOURCE. The tax will be updated on the invoices in ONESOURCE, and then it will be passed into Workday, and it will display on your customer invoice in Workday. This is also available for batch processing as well as real time. And the supplier invoice integration framework is rather the same. There is an added studio integration here to account for the accrued tax functionality in the supplier invoice integration. Also available for batch processing. Now that we've gone over a brief update on our partnership as well as the framework for the integration, I will pass it over to Caitlin Allen, who will be demoing the integration in the Workday tenant.
Great, thank you, Don. Hello, everyone. I will be walking you through a few demonstrations of the third-party tax integration which Intecrowd has built, connecting Workday to the Thomson Reuters ONESOURCE tax engine. Here we are on the home page of our Workday internal testing tenant. First, we will create a Canadian customer invoice showcasing the international capabilities of the ONESOURCE tax engine. I will now access the Create Customer Invoice task. As we advance to the Create Customer Invoice page in Workday, we need to enter some basic information. I will first enter Tax Company Canada, which has an address in Quebec on the header of the invoice. Next, I will enter Tax Canada as our bill to customer on the invoice. Upon entering the bill to customer, you will notice that some other information defaulted on the customer invoice off of the customer. Most noticeably that the ship to address off of the customer is in Ontario, as you can see on the left-hand side of the screen here. I'm specifically calling out the location of the company and customer because the locations will determine how and where tax is applied. In this case, we will see that tax will be applied based on the destination of Toronto, Ontario. As we continue to scroll down the page, we come to the section where we enter the line level detail of the invoice. For the purpose of this demonstration, we will keep the invoice to one line with our t-shirt sales item, which is just a generic taxable product. The integration will pass the taxable item to ONESOURCE, and the tax tables in ONESOURCE will determine the taxability of the item. You will see the extended amount of the t-shirt is $100. You will also notice that the ship to address is the same Toronto, Ontario address we mentioned before. The integration passes line level address data to ONESOURCE, so we may enter multiple addresses on separate lines, and tax will be applied to each individual line based on the addresses entered. This will be shown in one of our next demonstrations. As we continue to scroll to the right in our line detail, the last thing I would like to call to your attention is the various work tags available on the invoice line. Workday and Thomson Reuters has vast flexibility in what can be passed to determine taxability. Numerous Workday objects are available to pass to Thomson Reuters. In our testing tenant, we are passing product code, which is a custom work tag. You are also able to pass revenue and spend categories, purchase and sales items, and also purchase and sale item groups. Now that all the information we need on the invoice is complete, we can go ahead and submit this customer invoice. Submitting the invoice triggers the customer invoice business process, which will in turn launch the integration. The ONESOURCE integration is housed on the business process, as you can see here. The integration will pass the address and product codes related to the sales item to the ONESOURCE tax engine. The proper tax will be applied to the individual lines of the customer invoice, and the integration will pass the tax information back into Workday. I will now open back up our submitted customer invoice, and we can take a look at the data that was returned from ONESOURCE. Here we are viewing our customer invoice after the integration run. We will pay particular interest to the tax tab of the invoice here. As I open the tax tab and drill into the line drill down, we see that the integration has returned a tax amount of $13 with an effective tax rate of 13%. This amount is returned based on the effective tax rate of the Ontario province. To recap, we have demonstrated that entering a customer invoice in Workday with a taxable item will trigger the customer invoice event business process, launching the third-party tax integration, and passing the invoice data from Workday to ONESOURCE. Based on the information entered on the invoice, the proper tax is applied to each line, and the result is that we return the proper tax on the taxable item. In this next demonstration, we will simulate a scenario in which a vendor has not charged a company any tax on a purchase. We will see that upon submission of the supplier invoice with no vendor charge sales tax, the integration will be called and will ultimately return the proper tax amount relative to the location, purchase items or services, and extended amount on the invoice. To begin, I will run the Create Supplier Invoice task. I will enter tax company as our header company, which is located in Austin, Texas. We will be using a California supplier that is located in San Francisco. Once again, I'm specifically calling out the location of the company and the supplier because the locations will determine how and where tax is applied. Again, in this scenario, we are demonstrating how the integration returns tax on an invoice with no vendor charge tax. In this scenario, we need to change the default tax option to calculate self-assessed tax to tell the integration that the tax is being self-assessed. As we continue to scroll down to the page, we come to our invoice line detail. I will enter 3 invoice lines. On the first line, I will enter Yeti cooler as our purchase item, which is just a generic taxable product. Please note the ship to address will default to Austin, Texas, based on the company used at the header of the invoice. On the second line, I will enter a non-taxable item, which in this tenant is medicine. And finally, on our third invoice line, I will again enter Yeti cooler as our purchase item. This time, I will update the ship to address to our Burbank, California location. The integration passes line level address data to ONESOURCE, so we may enter multiple different addresses on separate lines. Tax will be applied to each individual line based on the addresses. As we continue to scroll to the right, we notice that our extended amount for the Yeti coolers is $100 and $200 for our non-taxable medicine. And again, as mentioned in our previous demonstration, we are passing the product code to Thomson Reuters to determine taxability. We're now ready to submit this invoice. Submitting the invoice triggers the supplier invoice business process, which will in turn launch the integration. The integration will pass the address and product codes related to the purchase items, which were entered on the supplier invoice, to the ONESOURCE tax engine. The proper tax will be applied to the supplier invoice, and the integration will pass the tax information back into Workday. We will then see that we have a self-assess the proper tax amount on the invoice. I will now open back up our submitted supplier invoice and see the data returned from ONESOURCE. As we scroll down to the line detail, we can click once again on our tax tab and see the tax detail returned from the integration run. Most notably, that all of the tax lines are marked as tax self-assessed. Clicking into the line drill down, we can view the tax amount which returned on each invoice line. We also see the breakdown of tax rates for each jurisdiction, which collects tax when purchase items are shipped to. Please note our non-taxable item returns 0 tax. Also, the taxable invoice lines return tax relative to the ship-to location. The items being sent to Austin, Texas are being taxed at 8.25%, and the items sent to Burbank, California at 10.25%. In our final demonstration, we will simulate a scenario in which a vendor has charged an incorrect tax amount. I will show that if an incorrect tax amount is entered on a supplier invoice in Workday, the integration will accrue the difference between the amount charged by the supplier and the tax amount that should have been charged on the invoice. In this case, the vendor will undercharge tax and a positive accrual will take place. Once again, I will enter tax company as our header company on the invoice, which is located in Austin, Texas. I will again be using our California supplier located in San Francisco. In this demonstration, we want to simulate the vendor charging less tax than what should have been charged and allowing the accrual functionality built in the integration to return the proper tax amount on the invoice so that our company can accrue the difference. To achieve this, we have enter tax due to supplier as the default tax option, which has been defaulted in from the header company. This option will allow us to enter the tax charge on the invoice. Scrolling down to our invoice line detail, we will keep this invoice to 1 line. I will once again enter our Yeti cooler as our purchase item. Once again, scrolling to the right, please note that the ship to address has defaulted from our header company, which is located in Austin, Texas. On this invoice, we will be purchasing 100 Yeti coolers, and that will bring us to an extended amount of $10,000. We now have an invoice line with an extended amount of $10,000, and we need to go back to the header to enter our vendor charge tax. As we have seen in our previous demonstration, the tax rate applied to a generic purchase item when it's shipped to Austin, Texas is 8.25%. Meaning we should be charged $825 on a $10,000 invoice. Again, to demonstrate the accrual functionality, I will enter a tax of $500, which we know is incorrect, but we want to show how the integration will accrue the additional or missing $325. We will now submit this invoice. And once again, submitting the invoice triggers the supplier invoice business process, which will in turn launch the integration to the ONESOURCE tax engine. From there, the proper tax will be applied to the supplier invoice, and we will see that we have accrued the additional $325 in tax, which the vendor did not charge. Opening back up our supplier invoice, we see the information returned from the ONESOURCE tax engine. We scroll down to the line level and take a look at the tax tab. We can see the tax detail returned by the integration run. Here we see that the original $500 of vendor charge tax is returned as tax paid. And the important part, at least for our demonstration, is that we have successfully accrued the additional $325, which has returned as tax self-assessed. Please note the transaction tax account posting rule will be used to determine your tax accounting. One final thing to note is that we are storing the original tax amount entered on the invoice as a custom object. If we come to the related actions on the supplier invoice, under additional data and click view all, we can see that the original tax entered is being stored. This allows us to report and compare the vendor charge tax amount to the actual tax liability incurred on the invoice. This may be useful for reporting and can also be used in conditional logic. And with that, we have concluded our demonstration of the accrual functionality of the third-party tax integration connecting Workday and the Thomson Reuters tax engine. Dawn, I will throw it back to you.
Thank you, Caitlin. And I will share my screen again. To note, I do see some questions coming in. We will answer them at the end. I just want to highlight that. So please continue to ask your questions, and during the Q&A session, we will address them. So thank you again, Caitlin. Next, we will hear from Jen Pelez, who will be discussing Thomson Reuters ONESOURCE, some of the key features and benefits.
Thank you, Don. Hi, everyone. So again, my name is Jennifer Pelez, and before I pass the mic to my colleague Horacio for the demonstration of the tax engine, I want to give you the highlights of our ONESOURCE solution. So first of all, what you have to know is that we have the best-in-class cloud technology. This allows for tax contents and system upgrades to not need any downtime. And since we moved into this native cloud technology Q2 of last year, our uptime has been 100% for customers. And what this also means for you is whatever you saw Caitlin perform in her transactions on Workday will all be seamless and uninterrupted, even with the content updates happening monthly. And we also have content for 200 plus countries for sales and use tax, VAT and GST, and any other taxes. And of course, we have the built-in feature for certificate management that enables you to delegate the certificate maintenance to your customers using the certificate management portal. And also from your transactional data coming in from Workday, ONESOURCE is also able to extract those information and put them into reports, and more importantly, tax returns. And this is true for the US, and also we are able to produce filing-ready returns. And in some states that allow e-filing, we have that capability too, making this a true end-to-end indirect tax solution. And lastly, we acknowledge that all customers are not cut from the same cloth. So aside from our tax content, configuration of your own customer policy is easily done in the intuitive and user-friendly user interface. So later on, my colleague Horacio will be showing that user-friendly interface for you to see how you can easily do your allocations and all your other configurations using the tax engine. And on the next slide, so this is another feature that also comes with the integration with Workday. So I wanted to highlight address validation because this can either be used as a standalone service or a package service with the ONESOURCE Indirect Tax solution. So as you can see here, this service directly integrates with Workday master data. So this means even upon entering your customer master or supplier master records, you will already know from there on if your address is wrong, and also if it is wrong, our service can also propose the corrected addresses. And this service uses the C+4 information coming in from our USPS database. And this is great for you because not only does it solve the problem of having bad data, it also allows for less issues during the delivery of those orders. And of course, as an overarching effect, so this will facilitate accurate taxability for all your transactions, because once you correct the bad data at the very beginning, so it will also spout out corrected data at the very end. And to wrap it up on the next slide, so the added value of automation of tax in Workday using ONESOURCE is that your tax team won't need to constantly and manually track for tax changes. So because our tax content is updated monthly, and also if there are multiple updates that happens during the month, we will update the tax contents. You don't need to actually track those tax changes because everything will be done in the back end in the Thomson Reuters ONESOURCE tax engine side. And of course, this will allow your Workday IT team to also reduce the changes needed that we need to put in relation to those tax updates. And also, of course, it lessens your overall risk due to manual input, because if you automate that process of selecting those tax codes, and because all of those tax rates will be coming in from the tax engine, those efforts that are normally manual will become automated. And that's all for my portion. Over to you, Orazio.
Great, thank you, Jen. Appreciate that. Good afternoon, or good morning, or good evening, I guess, depending on where you are. I'm Orazio Dalba, also from Thomson Reuters, and if you can go to the next slide real quickly. Yeah. So as my colleague Jen mentioned, we are a truly global tax engine, right? So it's not just U.S., Canada, it's the entire world, right? We're in over 200 plus countries. The only countries where we don't actually service is countries where there's military conflicts or embargoes, and North Korea, for example, and other areas. But we are a truly all-encompassing tax engine for all of your tax needs, U.S., Canada, and the world. Next slide, please, Don. Now, as Caitlin was able to show you earlier, she actually went into Workday actually, and that's what you're going to be seeing on a day-to-day basis, right? You'll actually be in Workday day in and day out. But if we sort of open up the hood, if you will, and looked inside, what would the Thomson Reuters tax engine, how does it pass information back to Workday, right? What information is included? Well, on the left-hand side, right, and this is just for US, but again, what you see here also applies to the Canada, and also applies to the world as well, from VAT, Brazil, and so on and so forth. But in addition to the rates, right, the product taxability, CITES rules, right, logic such as, for example, in some cases, like right in Florida, we have the discretionary sales tax. In some counties, in Tennessee, right, you have the max cap rule, and so on and so forth. So all of these idiosyncrasies for different states, for example, product taxability, such as, for example, shipping is taxable in some states, it's not taxable in others. Software, in many cases, for example, if it's downloadable business software, it may be either exempt or taxed at a reduced rate, for example, like Connecticut, 1%. But all of this is updated at a minimum. Again, US, Canada, and the world, at a minimum, at a monthly level. And what you see on the right-hand side is this is an actual update that you'll get, again, either once a month or sometimes more than once a month, depending if there's a legislative change mid-month. Now, how do we do all this? If you can, to the next one, please. We do it all ourselves, right? We have an army of people throughout the world, right? In the US and Canada and South America and the UK, everywhere. And we research it, we configure it, we document it, test it, and then we send it out to all of you. And we are SSAE 18 and ISAE 3402 compliant. And if the next one, please, Don. We are also, just to make sure that we're doing things properly, we even bring in a third party and audit ourselves and say, hey, how are we doing? Can we improve our processes to help serve our customers better, right? Next slide, please, Don. Now, as you noticed on the previous slide, we had the US, right? On the left-hand side here, again, update for Canada. On the right-hand side, update for international. So again, all of these updates for Canada, the US, and the world, right, are all maintained, issued by us at a minimum monthly level, sometimes more than once a month, depending if there's a specific rule or legislative change or tax regime change in a specific country, and so forth. Next slide, please, Don. Now, in addition to the updates of the rules, the rates, the logic, all that stuff, right? In addition to all of that, again, not just US and Canada, but the world, you also will receive with your monthly update messages, a taxability matrix. And this is just a little snippet or snapshot of software, and you can see all the combinations and permutations of software. You also see the second column, the UNSPSC commodity code, which we can also make use of. So as you pass these product, and again, as Caitlin was able to show you, as you pass product codes or mappings, right, the system will use kind of this matrix, and behind the scenes, it knows, oh, it's software, it's downloadable software, it's canned software, or it's a Yeti cooler, or it's non-prescription drugs, or whatever the case might be, whatever the product or service, landscaping service, whatever. The system will go in, look at the product or service, look at the country, look at the ship from, ship to, place a supplier service, look at the particular matrix, and know exactly how to treat that specific item and pass the information, as you saw earlier, right back into Workday. Next slide, please, Don. Now, if you have more than one ONESOURCE product, of course, the great news is we do make use of a single sign-on. So when you do sign on, you'll have access to all of your ONESOURCE products because, as you know, indirect tax is part of the ONESOURCE family or umbrella of products. So logging in once will give you access to all of your ONESOURCE solutions. And the great news is, Don, if you can, one more, there it is. The updates that I just spoke about, for our cloud solution, they're automatically maintained. So the great news is you can sort of the old expression, right? Leave the driving to us, right? Leave the updates to us. So the great news is all of those updates that come in from US, from Canada every month, from the world, basically, they all will be maintained and automated by us. So basically, you won't have to worry about going into your Workday and upgrading the tax rates or any other system that you may want to integrate with later on. But all of it's maintained by us. So from here, what I would like to do is actually kind of let's kind of open up the hood, like I mentioned before, and look inside the actual engine itself. Now, again, Caitlin was able to show you how it looks on a day-to-day basis and how it integrates with Workday. But how did the engine know what to do, right? So let's take a quick peek at this. And now you'll notice that I have a web browser here. And that is how you would actually log in and open up the hood, right, and look inside the engine. And you notice that we do offer multi-language support. Let me go ahead and switch to English here. And then once you log in, like you saw earlier, you'll have access to all of your ONESOURCE products, as well as any important messages that may be associated with any of these products. Obviously, if you want to scroll down, additional items that you can select, Reuters News. And finally, if you want to access our support staff or just want to inquire about other ONESOURCE products, you can access the items down here on the bottom right. Today, we're interested in indirect tax, so we're just going to click here. And I'll just minimize these. And the first thing that it'll show you when you launch indirect tax is a map of the world, right? And pretend this is a demonstration company, obviously, but it shows you your global footprint, where you have nexus in, and so on and so forth. It also shows you how many countries that you are obligated to collect tax. Down on the bottom a little bit, scrolling forward, right? If you use our certificate management module, like my colleague Jen mentioned earlier, you have the ability of seeing, hey, which certificates might be expiring soon, which ones might be expiring within the next few days, and so on and so forth. So you have a quick glimpse of what's happening, right? I will not go into too much detail in terms of how to configure this. This obviously will come on when you come on board. We'll go through and configure all that for you. But real quickly, I mentioned the product mappings. That's all done real quickly here, right? So from our configuration pull down, you can set your mappings. You saw earlier from the taxability matrix, you can pass product taxability mappings. You can pass the UNSBSC commodity code, and that will tell the solution what is being bought or sold. And then based on that, of course, and the ship from, ship to, or place of supplier service, the engine will make the appropriate determination and pass that information back, right? Additionally, you also have the capability of setting up your tax jurisdictions and VAT group registrations, right? So this obviously is where you would set up your Nexus configurations. You also have the ability of setting up custom fields or configurable type fields that you can pass additional information from Workday, like work tags or additional data that you want the engine to use to make a accurate determination. So for example, let's say that by default, you do have a product that is taxable. Let's say it's a taxable product. But let's say that it's being purchased, let's say it's a purchase, but it's being purchased for manufacturing or R&D purposes. As some of you may know, there are certain states that have that give some tax breaks to equipment that's being purchased for manufacturing or R&D. For example, in California, it qualifies for a reduced rate. In some states, it is completely exempt, right? So what you can do here is you can set up, various fields. You can rename these fields, and you can pass additional parameters from Workday saying, hey, this is for, cost center 1452. Or this is for GL account number 87848, or whatever the case might be. So you can pass additional, as many as you like. You can have up to 50 at the high invoice level, or as Caitlin showed you before, right? You can also do things at the line level as well. So you can actually pass additional at each line of an invoice. You can pass these specific custom type fields, and the system can make a determination that says, okay, well, based on all the information that you've provided, this particular item, yes, it's taxable, but it's being used for this specific purpose. Hence, go ahead and treat it in this fashion, right? And lastly, under the advanced setup, this is where, again, my colleague Jen mentioned something about setting up specific rules, setting up certificate management configuration. In our certificate management module, not only can you track certificates, it's a repository for all of your images. It houses all of the customers as well. Again, integrates seamlessly with Workday in terms of as information is passed through. It determines whether this particular customer has a certificate on file or not, whether it is expired or not, whether the certificate is a blanket certificate or not, or is this for a specific product or products that are being purchased. And lastly, you also have the ability of running reports and issuing out notifications to customers. Like, for example, earlier you noticed here down at the bottom, I have some certificates that are being expiring within 7 days or 30 days. You can send notifications to these customers that say, hey, thank you, Mr. Customer, for doing business with us. You do have a certificate that's going to be expiring within 7 days. If you please be kind enough to provide a new one, or we're going to have to start charging you tax, right? And lastly, in addition to notifications, as you're sending these notifications, we also provide a self-service web-based portal for certificate management as well. Meaning that now what you can do is you can actually provide a web URL or link to your customers that they can literally log in and see all the certificates you have on file with them, in addition to uploading new ones and expiring ones, right? So you can now put the onus on them in terms of making sure that they're up to date with everything. I also mentioned compliance, right? That's also available here as well. So under tools, we do have a compliance. You can launch our sales and use tax compliance, right? And this, as you saw earlier, also when I first logged in from one of those orange tiles, you can launch that separately as well. But just like certificate management, it is seamlessly integrated with our tax engine. So if you want to launch compliance from here, you can. And like Jen mentioned before, we do have the ability of e-filing. In fact, you can file up to 6 states directly from us, right? The other states that require or that participate in e-filing, you can go ahead and produce a file that comes out of ONESOURCE. You can then log into that state's website and simply upload the file that comes out of ONESOURCE, right? And again, some administration, such as defining user roles, we have a very robust permission matrix that enable you to say, okay, this person can access this, but can't access that, and so on and so forth. The other thing I want to cover, and where we're going to spend the majority of our time with the rest of today before we jump to Q&A, is the engine itself also provides a sandbox or test environment, if you will, a workbench or model scenario tool. Earlier, again, you saw Caitlin going ahead and go into Workday and actually produce an invoice, and it hit the engine, and the engine passed back exactly what it should be. You can also do something similar here. I don't have access to Workday, but what I can do is I can go to my model scenario tool. I can set up a what if type scenario and say, okay, well, what if something actually did happen from Workday, right? And the beauty about using this model scenario tool is that it enables you to create these what if type environments or what if type test scenarios without having to actually go into Workday, enter the information, submit the information, have it hit the tax engine. The tax engine comes back with the correct tax amount, and then you're like, okay, great, that's what I thought would happen. And then you have to cancel, avoid all that out because it wasn't real. You just wanted to see what the engine would do. Well, now you can do that, right? You can set up these scenarios same way that you can set them up within Workday, but you can set them up here within the engine itself. And again, the beauty about doing it here is you can, as you can see, I set these up several days ago. You can set them up ahead of time. You can run them anytime you'd like. And again, you don't have to worry about going back and voiding them or canceling them out in Workday. It basically simulates what something would have. So let's take a peek at some of these. So let's take a look at the first one, a sale type scenario. So in this particular instance, I'm just selling some equipment to a customer. It's very easy to set up a scenario. You just basically give it a name, give it a specific date, give it some kind of document, invoice number, whatever the case might be, tell it whether it's a buy or a sale, right? Enter some information such as the address, right? Let's say it's you're selling it to a customer in California, and let's say it's coming from your Nashville, Tennessee warehouse, or whatever the case might be. And then lastly, what are we selling to this particular customer? Well, let's say we're selling some kind of a crane or some kind of equipment, right? And there's also some shipping involved, right? So if this was a real transaction that came from Workday, what would the system do and pass right back to Workday, which you saw earlier, right? What Caitlin demonstrated? Well, the system would go ahead and return the following results. You notice in line 1 that we do have tax. And if I expand line 1, we can see that California has a whole slew of different taxes, right? We have a state tax, we have a county transportation tax, right? We have a city tax, all kinds of great taxes, right? And the system kind of knows exactly who gets a piece of the pie, so to speak, right? You'll also, and again, as you saw earlier, right, this information got passed back into Workday. If we look at line number 2, that was the shipping, you notice that right off the bat, California does not tax shipping. And inherently, again, the tax engine has this information built in, knows it, and immediately exempts this second line for shipping, right? And that is the first scenario. It's a sales scenario, right? Very, very, very basic scenario that the system goes ahead and calculates the information. So if this was a real transaction that came from Workday, now we know exactly what the system will do. Let's look at a purchase one real quickly. So I'm going to go to here, and we're going to look at the purchase one that we created. So very similar to the first one, except now we're flipping the coin, and rather than selling something, we're buying something, right? Similar setup, however, the only thing is we're now switching the company role from from seller to buyer. Again, just give it a name, give it a date, some kind of a document, invoice number, whatever the case might be. Set up the address. Let's say that we're going ahead and buying it for our Stamford, Connecticut office. Let's say it's coming from somewhere in Texas. And what are we buying? We're buying a couple of things. We're buying some, let's say a laptop computer, and we're buying some software that we're downloading, right? So we're buying a couple of things. You can have, again, as many line item invoices as you like. In this case, we're just buying 2 things here. So one more time, if this is indeed a real transaction that would come back, that would create it in Workday, what would the system do and pass right back? It would pass back the following. Let's take a look at our results. If we look at line 1, we see that the laptop computer is indeed taxable, right? Taxes the Connecticut rate, right? And it passes information back. Now, line 2 was that downloadable software. And if we take a look at that line, that is also taxed, but Connecticut has a rule that says that if it is business use software that's downloadable is taxable, but it does qualify for a reduced 1% rate. And again, inherently, the tax engine knows this information, applies the appropriate tax treatment, and of course, passes that right back to Workday, right? So hopefully this really helped demonstrate in terms, not just the integration, but if you kind of open up the hood, if you will, and look inside the tax engine, all the rates, the rules, the logic, the idiosyncrasies. And again, I demonstrated primarily just US scenarios, but you saw earlier that Caitlin demonstrated a Canadian one, right? Also, the same holds true for VAT as well. So if I was selling or buying something from Germany, from France, or whatever the case might be, the VAT rules will go into effect, registration will go into effect, the input and output credits, and all that, as well as all of the logic that goes into some of the sales in the European Union, such as triangulation, and so on and so forth. So that is all I had, Don. I appreciate it. Thank you so much for for your time, and I'm going to go ahead and stop. And Don, I'll turn it right back over to you.
Thank you, Horacio. And thank you to all the rest of the presenters today. You should see my screens back up with it saying question and answer. We will get to the question and answer section in a moment. I did see a few questions come in, and I thank the participants for adding them. I would like to say that just to start off, this was a lot of the high level information and functionality of the integrations. If you would like to see more detailed or specific business use cases for these presentations, Intecrowd as well as Thomson Reuters are open to doing demos to show some of the added functionality such as VAT that we might not have shown today. So first off, starting with the first question I see there is, can you please describe how use tax would be calculated? So I hope the kind of showed during the presentation, the demos, it looks like this was asked pretty early on, but essentially if sales or use tax is entered on an invoice, as soon as it's entered on the invoice, it will call the tax engine, and using either the what's tied to the product code, which could be either the sales category, revenue spend category, revenue category, a custom work tag, purchase item, sales item. It will call the tax engine, look at that item, what its taxability should be, as well as the jurisdiction that it would fall in using those ship to or bill to addresses. And those addresses can be decided on when you're configuring your ONESOURCE tax engine. So that's how taxability will come back. I hope that that answers your question there. Next is, I see another question is, how would someone know that tax should be self-assessed? Caitlin, I think you could probably speak to this as you demonstrated selecting the default tax option.
Yes, so you would select calculate self-assessed tax when the vendor did not charge tax on an invoice. The tax that is returned as self-assessed will not be paid to the supplier, depending on your account posting rules, how those are set up through the transaction tax account posting rule. It will most likely be put into a liability account. But yes, you would use calculate self-assessed tax when the vendor did not charge self-assess or did not charge tax.
And Caitlin, I'll also add in there that say if you have an undercharged or overcharged amount as well,
Yes.
The engine will self-assess that difference. And then like Caitlin said just before, you can use the transaction tax rules within Workday to be able to post those to specific accounts. All right, I hope that answered your question there. The next question we see is, we are a services company in Pennsylvania. Therefore, we deal with PA Help Supply Tax, which is tax on customer managed service projects based on our internal gross margin calculated on help supply sales in the year. Would ONESOURCE be able to accommodate this type of taxation? I will ask the ONESOURCE team who's on, are you familiar with this tax? If not, to the person who asked the question, we can go ahead and get this answer for you and reply via email.
Yeah, I can take a stab at this real quick, Don. This is Horacio. I'm not really too familiar with this particular tax. Is it? I'm assuming it's more of a is it 6% tax on or is it a different type of tax? Again, I'm not really too familiar. But what we can do is, like you saw before, if it's a specific type of tax, we could pass an additional parameter, as we saw earlier, from one of those user-defined fields or custom fields that state that it's a help supply service or something of that nature, which we can then write a rule that states that if it meets this criteria, to go ahead and charge a different type of tax or a different type of rate. I'm just kind of thinking out loud now in terms of how we may be able to accommodate that. Again, I apologize, I'm not really too familiar with this particular tax, but what we can do is, as the person that did ask it, if you could provide us with additional information, we can certainly do some more research and perhaps get back to you. Jen, any thoughts on that on your end? I'm not quite sure.
Yeah, it's the same response from me, Horacio. So if it's not something that's in our statutory content, we can always create a custom ruling for that and create those criteria based from the definitions and based from attributes that we will be passing to determine that it's a PA help supply tax. So that's something that we can talk through in more detail with the question asker.
All right, moving along. We see a question that says, will you help with the setup of spend categories, items, etc. in Workday so that the tax VAT can be calculated correctly? That's a great question. This comes up on all the projects we currently have going on or have implemented this tax engine integration with. It is a bit of coordination in the beginning of the project. It's usually part of the design session on would you like to use spend categories? Would you like to use purchase items or purchase item groups or a custom work tag in Workday to be able to map correctly over to Thomson Reuters ONESOURCE to the product code or commodity code. So that is part of the design session. We would help with setting up any additional spend categories to be part of the implementation. So I hope that answers your question there. And can the recording be shared? Yes, the recording can be shared. It was recorded after this, and we will share it to all the attendees. And does someone actually review the invoices? This is another good question, and I think it pertains more to Workday. Usually the best practice we say is the integration is ran twice on the business process. We showed it once just for the sake of time. It is ran first in an unaudited version. Then usually an invoice will go to a tax manager or accounting manager to be able to review the tax that came over from ONESOURCE. Once that step is passed, and if anything is changed on the invoice and there might be a different taxability because of that, the tax engine will call again at the end of the business process, and that would be the audited version of the integration. It would overwrite the information that was prior in Thomson Reuters ONESOURCE, and it would update the tax accordingly on the invoice in Workday. Next, I see, can Workday work on-premise with Sabrix, or it has to be integrated to Sabrix Cloud? I think this is a good question for Dan Fieldhouse.
Sure. So the verification process and all the development and deployments that we've done to this point have been with the cloud version. So that's what we're kind of certified to deploy and to implement at this time. That's not to say that that's not a possibility that we could work with an on-premise solution, but it would just have to be a discussion that we'd have to make sure that the capabilities that we needed were going to be properly supported in an environment that we could interface properly with. So it's a not at this point, but could be after further discussion, I guess, is the short version of that answer.
Thank you, Dan. And I see there's a following question that says, can the location of the user base be incorporated when calculating use tax? So yes, you can use that. It is part of design, and we have verified using point of title as well as the location of the user of the actual product. So if you purchase it and ship it to one location, but it's used in another, we can use that use location when calculating tax. We pass all the addresses that are on Workday over to Thomson Reuters ONESOURCE. It just depends on how you would configure it in the ONESOURCE engine. I see a couple of responses from the question on PA help supply. So PA help supply tax is calculated on an invoice by invoice basis. The internal gross margin calculation is updated internally every quarter. And Troy, did you have an answer for this?
Yeah, I'll take a stab at this, Don. Thanks for that. And thanks for the extra information, Jessica. This is something that would be, that I believe that we could accommodate and really think of the tax engine as a framework upon which we can build out custom scenarios and custom taxability and custom tax treatments based on specific requirements such as this one. So just spitballing here, but what we could do is set up a custom authority and then apply some custom rules where if this gross margin calculated can be provided, then we can incorporate that with logic and we can apply the 6% times that rate using logic and the engine. So The one caveat would be that as this gross margin calculation will vary quarter by quarter, some user on your end would have to go into the engine and update the logic to accommodate the new margin calculation, if that makes sense.
Excellent. Thank you, Troy. And I think that pretty much wraps up the questions that I'm seeing entered in. Unless there's any other questions, we do have 5 minutes remaining. But I would like to thank everyone again for attending today, asking such great questions. If you would like to reach out and discuss any other functionality integration, my team as well as the Thomson Reuters team will be providing contact information. After the call, you can see some of the contact information from the Intecrowd team here, who you can reach out to set up any further demos or have any further discussions about the integration or implementing the integration. And we will connect to our Thomson Reuters counterparts as well in all those conversations moving forward. So again, thank you all for attending. If there's anything else left to be said from the Thomson Reuters team, please go ahead and say it now. If not, I think we can end up ending the call and everyone have a great day. Alrighty. Well, thank you everyone for attending. We do appreciate it. And we will be sending out this recording for all of you who attended, as well as those who couldn't attend but registered.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Bye-bye, everybody.
Thank you.